Mary just can't explain the behavior of her new horse for the life of her. No matter what she does, how many times she washes up or changes her pants, her new horse Stardust just keeps sniffing her behind. It gets to a point where it is starting to become almost concerning, as this is not normal behavior. But then Mary's husband Jason sees why the horse is doing this. He immediately takes Mary to the doctor to get his suspicions confirmed. Jason is extremely nervous as they are waiting to be seen by the doctor, but Mary still does not understand what he is nervous about. He had barely spoken a word to her ever since he told her that they needed to see a doctor right away. Jason just did not want to scare her. After a quick talk with Jason, the doctor does some tests on Mary and then leaves them alone again while he goes to check on the results. Mary is still left in the dark, and it's starting to bother her now. What does Jason think is going on with her? But before she can get mad about it or starts a discussion, a worried-looking doctor comes rushing back into the room. Jason had been completely right in his suspicion. But what had the doctor discovered? Why did Mary's new horse keep sniffing her behind? And how did Jason figure out the reason? The death of Mary's beloved horse Dante had made it nearly impossible for her to get a new one. Dante had been in Mary's life for over a decade, and he had seen her through so many milestones over the years. Losing him was painful, and she nearly gave up caring for horses altogether. For 2 years, Mary was convinced there would be no horse that could ever compare to Dante. She refused to entertain the idea of replacing him. For her, it was simply too soon. One day, she was struck with a change of heart. She missed riding and caring for a horse of her own. It was time for her to move on. Mary loved riding horses, and it had been that way since she was 7 years old. There had not been a year since she had not owned one. She felt depressed without Dante, and she knew the only thing that could fix this sadness was getting back to her equestrian lifestyle. Her husband, James, was especially hurt to see his wife upset for so long. He had made it his mission to give her all the support and encouragement she needed to find a new horse companion. It was going to be difficult, but he was happy to help Mary. They had no idea what this process would lead them to discover. Mary and James took the weekend to do some research and visit local horse breeders. After locating one of the top-rated horse breeders in the state, they decided to take a day trip to see if the horses were worth the hype. It seemed like all the horses in the breeder's care were healthy and happy. Mary couldn't wait to get there. Upon arriving at the stables, Mary was in shock. There were a ton of horses to choose from, and they were all so beautiful. She couldn't help but feel some sort of connection to every horse she passed. If she could, she would adopt every single horse she saw. Unfortunately, she could only choose one. It was an overwhelming decision. Mary and Jason took their time, exploring all their options and interacting with as many of the horses as possible. A few of them were shy and didn't respond to Mary unless she offered them a snack. Others were overly excited and affectionate. But there was one horse in particular that Mary felt drawn to. She couldn't help but feel there was something different about this one. As Mary approached the horse's stable, she immediately craned her neck to sniff at Mary, immediately taking interest in her. She gave Mary a few nudges with her head, and she felt a warm rush of emotion. She nearly forgot how loving and intelligent these creatures were. The horse tried its best to peer around Mary's shoulders, and it appeared as if he was trying to get her to turn around. Mary assumed she was being playful, and was smitten by her behavior. Mary turned to James and gave him a double thumbs up. This was the one. The couple would soon find a reason behind the horse's immediate affection. Mary and Jason purchased the horse, loading her carefully into their trailer. The horse's name was Stardust. It was perfect and magical, just like she was. Mary felt nervous excitement bloom inside her. Stardust was gorgeous and sweet, but she was quite different from soft temperament Dante. Getting used to her energy would be a bit of a challenge. Hey, calm Yarkovoy. Advertisement. Though she's had a long history with horses, Stardust was the first female horse Mary ever owned. She didn't know if this would affect their dynamic or her ability to properly train Stardust, but she was up for the challenge. Mary knew the effort would be good for her, and she was willing to work hard to build a good relationship with Stardust. Dante wasn't as affectionate as Stardust, but Mary just assumed the horse was used to lots of attention at her previous home and expected the same at her new one. Mary did her best to figure out what Stardust needed, but it was becoming apparent to her that the level of concern Stardust had toward her was not normal. The strangest thing about Stardust was the fact that she was so keen to sniff and prod around Mary's back. Mary couldn't understand this and tried to discourage Stardust from that behavior. Stardust, however, was persistent. She wouldn't change no matter how many times Mary tried to redirect her. At first, Mary assumed Stardust was getting adjusted to her scent, and perhaps this was a means of establishing trust between the pair. As time went on, that theory seemed less and less probable. What was Stardust's issue with Mary's scent? She worried this would make her fall back into a depression about losing Dante since things felt so easy with him. The strangest part about the constant sniffing and nudging was that it was always focused on her butt. It was a little funny to Mary, and especially hilarious to her husband. But as the weeks passed, it made her feel insecure. She worried she smelled bad and scrubbed mercilessly every time she bathed. Her husband assured her she smelled perfectly fine, but she still felt weird about the whole situation. In fact, she was beginning to dread her time with Stardust. The sniffing was getting so out of hand that she could barely mount Stardust half the time. She tried everything, from switching soaps to buying new pants. It felt like a nightmare. What could she do? One night, Mary cried to her husband about Stardust's behavior. She didn't want to, but she was considering returning the horse to the breeder at this point. She felt helpless. James soothed her, telling her that she shouldn't be so quick to give up. There was obviously something special about Stardust, and it was simply going to take a while to sort out her peculiarities. James offered to join Mary one morning at the stables to see just how bad Stardust was getting for himself. He also wanted to see if the horse would have just as much of a field day with his behind as she was having with Mary's. This was the only experiment he could think of. When they got to the stables and entered Stardust's enclosure, the horse began sniffing around Mary like usual. James ushered Mary to step out and let him be alone with the horse. After 10 minutes alone with Stardust, it was apparent the horse had no interest in sniffing anyone but Mary. Knowing that Stardust was only particular about sniffing Mary made James begin to wonder what the reason behind the animal's behavior could be. He wondered what was special about his wife that made the horse keenly interested in her. While trying to think about the situation, a strange thought struck his mind. Even though the strange thought that crossed his mind seemed impossible, he decided to ask Mary about it. James had once heard about a dog's ability to sense if a woman was pregnant. Based on that notion, he began to wonder if that was what Stardust was smelling. Mary was skeptical about being pregnant, but she decided to take the test. Mary decided to take the test irrespective of how she felt about it because she was eager to know what was going on between her and Stardust. She had had enough of the animal's behavior that she was ready to do anything to get a solution to the situation. Unfortunately, the pregnancy test came back negative. On getting the result, Mary felt slightly disappointed. She had hoped the reason behind her horse's action would be that simple, but it wasn't. It was painful to return to the same point they were with their animal. Since they couldn't get a solution to the issue, Mary always tried to get away from Stardust as quickly as possible. As a result, she was constantly feeding and brushing it in haste. Having such a distant interaction with her beloved animal left her feeling horrible. It was evident that she needed help as soon as possible, so she began to think about where she could seek assistance with the issue. While wondering about the perfect person to seek help, the thought of posting her story online dropped in her mind. She felt there might be other people with the same problem. She immediately aligned with the idea of posting her story online without hesitation. Mary typed her story as clearly as possible and posted it online, hoping to get a helpful response. Making a post about such personal information felt strange, but she had no alternative, as she had gotten to her wits' end. While she was still thinking about what she just did, she got an email. Without thinking twice, she opened the email and read through it. The email was sent by a lady who had experienced something similar to Mary's case. The lady asked if she could speak with Mary in person. Based on Mary's urgent need for a solution, she agreed to the lady's request for a meeting. The next day, Mary got dressed and made her way to a little coffee corner to meet with the lady. On getting to the meeting point, they exchanged pleasantries. The lady said her name was Valerie, She stated that she owned a horse rehabilitation facility. Valerie said Mary's story moved her, and she wouldn't want her to give up. Valerie explained further that she had lived through the same ordeal. The only difference was that her horse was sniffing her neck, not her back like Mary. Since the lady was willing to help Mary find a solution to her problem, she gave her a list of options. The list contained what was likely to be the issue. She concluded by asking her to look into all of the possibilities. Mary was grateful for the help Valerie rendered her. By the end of their meeting, Mary had a new energy to see the situation through. Since Mary informed James about her meeting with Valerie earlier, that day, she needed to give her husband feedback on how the meeting went. So, she showed the list Valerie had given her to James. He took the list from her and began to check through all the options. As he was doing that, one of the options caught his attention. His face turned pale as he saw that particular option. James didn't bother to check the list any further. Instead, he told his wife that she needed to see a doctor immediately. Mary was surprised at James's words. Left to her, she would have loved to explore the other options that didn't require going to the doctor. But she had to agree as James wasn't willing to have it another way. James was aware that Mary's agreeing to see the doctor was out of compulsion, so she was going to stall before doing the needful. Due to this, he went behind her back to book an appointment with the doctor on Mary's behalf. After securing the appointment, James was left with the thought of how he would be able to get his wife to the doctor without informing her until the last minute. A day before the appointment, James was still thinking so hard about an excuse he could quickly give Mary. After several hours of thinking, he got a great idea. He started acting like he had excruciating pain in his leg. This act caught Mary's attention, so she didn't hesitate to drive him to the doctor the next day. They got to the hospital early the next day, so they had to wait in the waiting room. While waiting, Mary noticed that James was very nervous. She couldn't keep what she noticed to herself, so she asked him what was wrong and why he was silent. James responded that she wouldn't understand. At the moment the doctor came out to call James's name, Mary detected what was going on. Mary got to know what was happening because the doctor called her name instead of James. On hearing her name, she looked at her husband with anger and confusion all written over her face. Since she was already at the hospital, there was no going back. So she stood up with her husband, and they followed the doctor. Immediately the doctor closed the door, Mary began to speak, explaining that the doctor calling her name was a big mistake as James was the one at the hospital to see the doctor. While explaining, the doctor interrupted her and asked her to sit down. The doctor tried to calm her down by saying all the issues would be sorted out. Mary couldn't help but give her husband looks as she sat in the doctor's office. The doctor informed Mary that James had told him everything, and that all the doctors at the hospital were intrigued by James' explanation. This was because they had never heard a story like that before. He further explained that James took the right step to book an appointment with him. On hearing the doctor's explanation, Mary sighed and became to hear the doctor out. Since they were with the doctor already, she felt the best thing to do was to cooperate with the doctor on whatever he was going to be doing. Mary took the initiative to explain everything to the doctor again while he nodded along. After making an explanation of what had happened again, the doctor asked her to do something. He asked Mary to undress her pants to see if anything was out of the ordinary. Mary resisted and said she and James had looked multiple times and saw nothing. But the doctor insisted that she did as he had directed. Since she needed to do as the doctor said, she unbuttoned her pants and laid down. The doctor began to inspect her and check if there were any lumps or bumps under her skin. While doing the checks, he stopped suddenly and quickly looked for a magnifying glass. The doctor's sudden action made Mary start getting worried. While still lying down, she asked if something was wrong, but the doctor didn't respond. Instead, he told him he would be back in a second. Mary was left wondering what was going on. After a few minutes, the doctor returned with another doctor. As soon as the doctor returned, he apologized for keeping Mary waiting and told her he wanted a second opinion, which was why he sought another doctor. The second doctor did the same check and confirmed what the first doctor had already seen. Mary expressed her shock by shouting, "Oh no!" The doctor tried to calm her down but explained further that what they saw was likely skin cancer. To confirm their speculations, he asked that a biopsy be done. A doctor's explanation got Mary scared. At the same time, she was left wondering how Stardust could have smelt what was happening. Without wasting time, they had the biopsy done, and it confirmed that she had skin cancer. At the confirmation, the doctors were baffled that Mary's horse had noticed the issue and knew it needed to inform her. The couple couldn't hide their surprise at the animal's action too. The doctors concluded that the horse saved Mary's life because she got diagnosed just in time. Based on the timeliness of her diagnosis, she was scheduled for an operation, and they were able to remove all the cancerous cells. After the surgery, Mary had to take some time off to recover. As a result, she couldn't ride her horse. Even though she couldn't ride on the horse for a while, Mary took it upon herself to visit Stardust every day. After some time, Mary got back in shape, and Stardust got an honorary ribbon for saving her life. From then, she began to rebuild her bond with the horse, and never doubted it again. So, they continued to make each other happy as the day went by.